There's a cave in South Africa where archaeologists found human skulls with puncture wounds that match leopard teeth exactly, buried in the same layer of earth as leopard bones. Not nearby, not in a different part of the cave. The same layer, meaning humans and the animals that killed them were sheltering in the exact same spot, at the exact same time, from the exact same thing, rain. Because for most of human history, a heavy multi-day rainstorm wasn't a lazy afternoon. It was one of the most dangerous situations a person could be in. And understanding what our ancestors actually did to survive those days, trapped, wet, and unable to hunt, might explain something much bigger than survival. It might explain where human culture itself came from. Picture it. You haven't eaten in 2 days. You know exactly where the herd is. You tracked it yesterday, found the prints, mapped the route in your head. All you need to do is get there. And then it starts raining. Not a light drizzle. A heavy, wind-driven downpour that doesn't let up. All day, all night, into the next morning. And it's still going. Now you can't hunt. You can't follow tracks because the mud's washed them away. You can't move across open, wet ground because a twisted ankle out here with bare feet on slick rock isn't an inconvenience. It's a death sentence. The river near camp is rising. And the fire. The one thing keeping you warm, keeping predators away, keeping you alive, is starting to struggle under the wet. You're not bored. You're trapped. Today, rain means closing a window, making coffee, wrapping yourself in a blanket, and opening Netflix. It's background noise, something that makes you feel calm, maybe even sleepy. You might not even make it through the episode. But for a human 50,000 years ago, that exact same sound, the one lulling you to sleep right now, could kill you 3 different ways before it even stopped. The first way is cold. A wet human body loses heat up to 25 times faster than a dry one. Without clothing, without waterproof shelter, a long storm in anything below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit could drop your core temperature into hypothermia range within hours. And most of the environments our ancestors lived in got that cold at night, even across Africa, especially at higher elevations during the wet season. The second danger is flooding. Caves and rock shelters, the main places early humans lived, tend to sit at the base of hillsides or near rivers, which means heavy rain often meant flash floods. Archaeologists have found thick layers of flood sediment inside caves that were actually occupied at the time. And in some of those caves, the sediment marks the last time anyone ever lived there again. And the third danger, maybe the worst, is predators. Rain drives animals into shelter too. And sometimes that shelter is the same cave you're already in. Which brings us back to those South African skulls with the leopard tooth puncture marks found layered in with the leopard's own remains. Rain didn't just make life uncomfortable, it compressed the entire world. Humans, predators, and prey all forced into the same small, dry spaces at the same time. And in the middle of all that danger, one job mattered more than any other: keeping the fire alive. Here's why that was so terrifying. We have evidence of controlled fire use going back at least 400,000 years at a site called Kesem Cave in Israel, and possibly as far back as 1,000,000 years at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. But controlling a fire that already exists and creating a new one from nothing are 2 completely different skills. And for most of human history, most people probably couldn't reliably do the second one. If your fire went out during a storm, you might not be able to relight it at all. You'd have to carry an ember in from somewhere else, wrapped in green leaves or packed inside a woody growth called tinder fungus, which can hold a smoldering coal alive inside itself for hours. Essentially, a biological lighter. We know this wasn't guesswork, either. When researchers found Otzi, the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old body preserved in the Alps, he was carrying a complete fire-starting kit in his belt pouch: tinder, fungus, flint, iron pyrite for striking sparks, and backup plant tinder. Even 5,000 years later, losing your fire was serious enough that people carried dedicated survival gear specifically to prevent it. So when rain hit, the first priority wasn't building shelter. It was protecting the flame. Move it deeper into the cave. Shield it with hides or brush. Feed it carefully, not too much, not too little. Search out dead lower branches from conifer trees still covered by canopy, usually dry underneath, even in a downpour. Split open soaked logs to reach the dry wood inside. Use birch bark as kindling, since birch contains a compound called betulin that actually keeps burning even when wet. It's entirely plausible that one person's whole job during a storm was simply sitting beside that fire for hours, tending it, shielding it, making sure it never went out. Because that fire wasn't just warmth. It was light, safety, cooked food, and the center of every social interaction the group had. Letting it die wasn't carelessness. It could be fatal for everyone in the group at once. So the fire's holding, you're mostly dry, and you still can't leave. What do you actually do with that time? You make things. And the archaeological record on this is remarkably clear. Caves and rock shelters are packed with evidence of manufacturing, stone tools in every stage of production, along with piles of tiny flaking debris. The chips that fly off when shaping a blade, concentrated in exactly the spots where someone would have sat near firelight, working for hours at a stretch. And it wasn't only stone tools. At Blombo's Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered a 100,000-year-old ochre processing workshop. Abalone shells used as mixing containers, ochre ground down into fine powder, bone tools used to stir and apply it. That's not desperate survival behavior. That's organized production, with a system likely carried out while rain pounded outside. Then there are the bone needles, delicate tools with tiny drilled eyes, first appearing in the archaeological record around 61,000 years ago in South Africa, later showing up across Europe and Asia. You don't make something that precise while running from a threat. You make it while sitting still, focused, with hours of nothing else to do. Rainy days handed people exactly that kind of time. And this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. At a Neanderthal site called Abre du Maris in France, archaeologists found a tiny fragment of twisted plant fiber cord, the oldest direct evidence of string ever discovered. At Hohle Cave in Germany, they uncovered a 35,000-year-old tool carved from mammoth ivory, drilled with 4 holes and cut with spiral grooves, purpose-built for twisting plant fibers into rope. Someone sat down in that cave and carved a dedicated rope-making machine. Making rope is slow, repetitive work that demands patience, the perfect task for a stretch of bad weather. And rope changed everything downstream of it, tying materials together, building sturdier shelters, constructing snares and traps, binding tools to handles. A staggering amount of later human technology depends on string, and it was almost certainly invented by someone stuck indoors, waiting for rain to pass. It wasn't just tools and rope, either. People were making their shelters livable. At Sibutu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something surprising for a site 77,000 years old: actual bedding. Layers of sedges, rushes, and grasses carefully arranged into sleeping mats, topped with leaves from a plant called Cape laurel, a natural insect repellent. Someone in that cave wasn't just surviving. They were making it home, periodically burning the old bedding and laying down fresh material to keep it clean. 77,000 years ago, people were already doing pest control. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expects. All of that, the tools, the rope, the bedding, is the practical stuff. What comes next is something else entirely: art. Chauvet Cave in southern France holds paintings roughly 36,000 years old. Lions, horses, rhinos, bears, rendered with a level of anatomical skill and observed movement that still stuns researchers today. Some of the animals are captured mid-stride, muscles tensed, heads turning, the unmistakable work of people who'd watched these creatures for thousands of hours and then recreated them from memory, deep underground, by firelight. Chauvet isn't alone, either. Lascaux, Altamira, and the cave art of Sulawesi in Indonesia, dated to at least 45,000 years ago, currently stand as the oldest known figurative art on Earth. What makes all of this even stranger is where the paintings actually are. They're not near the entrance, where you'd naturally sit for shelter and warmth. They're deep, sometimes hundreds of meters in, through narrow passages, in chambers you'd have to crawl to reach. Someone carried a small animal fat lamp into total darkness and painted. Nobody does that when the weather's good and the hunting's easy. You do it when you can't go outside, when the rain's been falling for 2 days straight, when every tool you own is already sharpened, and there's genuinely nothing left to do but go deeper into the dark and make something. We can't prove cave art was strictly a rainy day activity, but the logic holds together uncomfortably well. The most dramatic creative explosion in human prehistory happened in exactly the places where people were most likely to be stuck indoors for extended stretches. And that idea points to something even bigger. Rain may not have just produced art. It may have helped produce culture itself. Think about what actually happens when 15 to 30 people are forced into a confined space together for days with nothing urgent to do. You talk. You listen. You share what you know. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study comparing daytime and nighttime conversations among the Jew/Honzi Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert. During the day, conversations stayed practical. Land rights, resources, complaints. But at night, around the fire, more than 80% of conversation shifted to stories, songs, and ceremony. The firelight itself seemed to change what people were willing to talk about, softening faces, easing tension, opening people up in a way daylight conversation didn't. The campfire wasn't just a heat source. It was the original social network. And what got shared there wasn't idle chatter. It was survival knowledge. Where the water sources dry up in summer, which plants are safe to eat, where the best flint deposits are found, how to track a specific animal across difficult ground. That's critical information passing directly from one mind to another through nothing but speech. Beyond the practical knowledge, there was something else being built around those fires. Stories, myths, explanations for why the rain comes and where it goes. Every ancient culture ever studied has its own body of rain mythology, and someone had to invent those stories, almost certainly while sitting through the exact situation the story was trying to make sense of. And there's real evidence for how powerful this oral tradition actually became over time. The oldest verified oral traditions on record, Australian Aboriginal stories describing sea level changes, accurately match geological events that happened roughly 7,000 years ago. Those stories survived 7,000 years on nothing but people telling them to each other, generation after generation. That kind of cultural memory doesn't develop by accident. It requires groups spending enormous stretches of time doing exactly this, sitting together, retelling the same stories over and over until they're etched into a community's collective memory. Rainy days, in other words, weren't dead time. They were transmission time. The days when knowledge moved from old to young, when skills got taught by demonstration, when the group's shared memory got reinforced and passed forward. And here's the part almost nobody mentions. Rain wasn't always the enemy. Sometimes it was the best thing that could happen. After a heavy rain, the ground turns soft, and soft ground makes for the clearest, most detailed animal tracks you'll ever find. Some of the best tracking conditions anywhere occur right after a storm clears. Rain also meant water. Early humans could collect and store it, and there's evidence they understood this deliberately. Natural rock depressions that fill with clean rainwater turn up near nearly every known prehistoric campsite, and some show clear signs of being carved deeper on purpose to hold more. Rain brought food too, just in a different form. Mushrooms and certain plants flourish right after a downpour. Tubers pull more easily from softened soil. Insects surface in large numbers. A rainy stretch didn't shut down the food supply, it transformed it. And the groups who understood that shift had a real advantage over the ones who didn't. Termites are a perfect example. They swarm in tropical Africa right after rain, and they're one of the most protein-dense food sources around. No tools needed, no weapons. You simply gather them. Chimpanzees today are known to gorge themselves on termite swarms after rainstorms, and early humans almost certainly did the exact same thing, likely on a much larger scale. So what did ancient humans actually do when it rained for days on end? Everything that mattered. They kept the fire alive. They made the tools they'd need for the next hunt. They sewed the clothing that would carry them through winter. They twisted the rope that would hold their shelters together. They ground the pigment they'd use to paint animals onto cave walls deep underground. They told the stories that carried survival knowledge from one generation into the next. And when the rain finally broke, they stepped outside onto soft ground, covered in perfect tracks, and got straight back to work. Rain didn't slow them down. It gave them the time to prepare for everything that came after. Every tool, every stitch of clothing, every story, every painting on a cave wall, all of it came out of downtime. Out of the hours and days when going outside simply wasn't an option, and there was nothing left to do but sit near a fire and think. Boredom, in the way we understand it, probably didn't exist for them, because when your survival depends on what you can make with your hands in the next few hours, you don't get bored, you get resourceful. And that might be one of the biggest reasons we're still here at all.